The autumn sun cast long shadows across the Carmel Film Festival's red carpet as Clint Eastwood stood motionless, his weathered face a mask of unexpected recognition. Before him, an elderly woman held out a faded photograph, her hands trembling slightly. The crowd of photographers fell silent, sensing something profound in the legendary actor's hesitation. The photograph, yellowed with age, showed a much younger Eastwood in a dishwasher's apron, standing beside a smiling waitress in what appeared to be a small diner. Without a word, Eastwood turned and walked away from the event, leaving whispers and confusion in his wake. What the crowd didn't know was that this photograph would unlock a 40-year-old debt of gratitude that would change dozens of lives forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sleek black SUV wound its way through Carmel's narrow streets, its tinted windows reflecting the golden California sunset. Inside, Clint Eastwood sat in uncharacteristic silence, his hands gripping the steering wheel just a little tighter than usual. The photograph he'd seen less than an hour ago had stirred something deep within him, memories he'd tucked away decades ago, back when dreams of Hollywood seemed as distant as the stars themselves. "Pull yourself together," he muttered, parking outside his favorite spot, a small coffee shop that had somehow survived the town's gradual transformation into a tourist haven. The owner, Tommy Chen, was one of the few people who still treated him like a regular person rather than a living legend. The bell above the door chimed softly as he entered. Tommy looked up from behind the counter, his weathered face creasing into a genuine smile. "The usual, Mr. Mayor?" he asked, already reaching for the simple white mug they both knew would be filled with black coffee, no sugar. "Just Clint today, Tommy, and maybe something stronger than coffee." Tommy's eyebrows rose slightly. In 15 years of serving Eastwood, he'd never heard that request. Without a word, he reached beneath the counter and produced a bottle of aged bourbon and 2 small glasses. The cafe was empty save for them, a rare occurrence that felt more like providence than chance. "Want to talk about it?" Tommy asked, pouring 2 fingers of amber liquid into each glass. Eastwood pulled the second glass closer but didn't drink. "You ever have a moment from your past just ambush you?" "Ah," Tommy nodded sagely. "The ghosts of memory. They tend to show up when we least expect them. There was this woman at the festival today," Eastwood began, his voice taking on the gravelly quality that came with age and reflection. "She had a photograph. Must have been from 56, maybe early 57. Back when I was nobody, working at May's Diner in Oakland." Tommy leaned forward slightly, recognizing the rare moment when Clint Eastwood, the man who'd built a career on saying less rather than more, needed to talk. "May's Diner," Eastwood continued, finally taking a sip of bourbon. "Funny how clearly I can still see that place. Yellow linoleum countertops, always slightly sticky no matter how many times you wiped them down. Chrome trim that needed polishing every morning. And May." He paused, something catching in his throat. May Thompson. She ran that place like a ship's captain, but with the heart of a saint. The bourbon in his glass caught the light, creating amber patterns on the dark wood counter. "I was working there, trying to scrape together enough money for acting classes. Had this crazy idea I could make it in Hollywood." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Was sleeping in my car most nights, showing up early to use the diners. Sink to clean up. Thought I was being clever, thought nobody knew." Tommy remained silent, understanding that some stories need space to unfold. May knew. She always knew. Started leaving the back door unlocked, made sure there was always too much food at the end of her shift. Called it kitchen waste that would just go in the trash anyway. Eastwood's eyes took on a distant look. But that wasn't even the half of it. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew his phone, fingers moving with surprising dexterity, as he pulled up a photo he'd taken of the old photograph at the festival. See that envelope in my hand, in the picture? Tommy leaned in, squinting at the screen. In the grainy image, a young Clint Eastwood stood next to a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. Sure enough, there was an envelope visible in the young man's hand. That was my first semester's tuition for acting classes at Berkeley Rep Theater. I thought I'd finally saved up enough from washing dishes, but when I counted it all up, I was short, way short. Eastwood's voice grew softer. The next day, May handed me that envelope. Said someone had left it as a tip but forgot to write their name. Said she thought maybe it was meant for me. "She gave you the money?" Tommy asked, though he already knew the answer. Took me years to figure it out. May had been saving that money. Herself, probably for months. Working double shifts, taking extra tables. The woman at the festival today, that was her daughter, Margaret, showed up with that photograph and a letter May had written before she passed away. Eastwood finally took another sip of bourbon, letting the warm liquid settle in his chest. You know what the crazy thing is? That wasn't the only time she did something like that. Margaret told me her mother had a whole box of thank you letters from people May had helped over the years. Aspiring musicians, painters, writers, anyone with a dream and an empty wallet seemed to find their way to May's diner. The cafe had grown darker as they talked, the sunset painting the windows in deep oranges and purples. Tommy quietly got up and flipped the closed sign on the door before returning to his seat. "So what happened?" he asked. "At the festival, I mean." "I walked away," Eastwood admitted, shame coloring his words. "Just turned and left. Couldn't handle it right there, with all those cameras and people watching. May never wanted recognition, never asked for anything in return. And there I was, probably the most successful person she ever helped, and I couldn't even face her daughter." Tommy refilled their glasses without being asked. "But you're not done with this story, are you?" "No," Eastwood said firmly, a familiar determination, settling into his features. "No, I'm not. May Thompson spent her life quietly changing people's lives, believing in their dreams when nobody else would. And nobody knows her name. Nobody knows what she did." He pulled out his phone again, this time pulling up a contact. "I've got a call to make to the president of Monterey Peninsula College. Time to make sure May's legacy lives on." "What are you thinking?" "A scholarship fund." "No, a whole program. For people like I was back then. Dreamers with empty pockets and full hearts." Eastwood stood, leaving his bourbon unfinished. "The May Thompson Arts Fellowship. Has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Tommy smiled, recognizing the look in Eastwood's eyes, the same look that had helped build a career spanning 6 decades, the look that had gotten him elected mayor of Carmel. "Need any help?" "Actually," Eastwood paused at the door. "I might. Margaret mentioned that some of May's old regulars still live in Oakland. People who might remember might have stories to tell. Feel like taking a road trip tomorrow?" "Let me guess, you're driving?" "Damn right I am. Pick you up at 7. As the bell chimed Eastwood's departure, Tommy began cleaning up, thinking about how some debts can never be fully repaid, but trying means everything. Outside, the last rays of sunset painted Carmel's streets in gold, and somewhere he imagined, May Thompson was smiling. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, typical for Northern California in autumn. Eastwood pulled up in front of Tommy's cafe exactly at 7, driving not his usual SUV but a classic 1955 Ford Thunderbird convertible. Tommy stood on the curb, a thermos of coffee in each hand, and let out a low whistle. "Thought this trip deserved something special," Eastwood explained as Tommy climbed in. "Besides, May used to say this was her dream car. Never got to own one herself." The drive north toward Oakland gave them time to plan. Eastwood had made several calls the night before, setting things in motion. The president of Monterey Peninsula College was cautiously excited about the scholarship program, though Eastwood suspected the caution would evaporate once the funding details were finalized. Margaret Thompson had provided a list of names. regular. Customers from May's diner who might remember those days. People whose lives had intersected with May's quiet generosity. "First stop," Eastwood said, handling the Thunderbird with easy confidence, "is to see Richard Martinez. Used to be a jazz musician, played weekends at the diner for tips. Margaret says he owns a music store in Oakland now, teaches piano to kids." The drive took them through changing landscapes, coastal cliffs giving way to suburbs, then urban sprawl, and finally into Oakland proper. The city had changed dramatically since Eastwood's diner days, but some corners still held onto their mid-century character. Martinez Music stood on a corner that seemed frozen in time, its hand-painted window display advertising guitar lessons and instrument repairs. A bell similar to Tommy's chimed as they entered, and an elderly man looked up from where he was restringing a guitar. "Be with you in just a minute," he called, then did a double-take. "Well, I'll be damned. Either I'm hallucinating or Clint Eastwood just walked into my shop." "Hello, Richard," Eastwood said warmly. "Been a long time since those weekend sets." At May's, Richard Martinez set down the guitar carefully, his hands shaking slightly. "May's Diner? Now that's a name I haven't heard in years. Must be, 40 years since those days?" 47, Eastwood corrected, "and we need to talk about May." The old musician gestured toward a small sitting area in the corner of his shop, surrounded by vintage guitars hanging on the walls. "May Thompson," he said, easing himself into a worn leather armchair. "The angel of Oakland's dreamers." "That's exactly why we're here," Eastwood said, taking a seat across from him. Tommy remained standing, instinctively understanding his role as observer in this moment. "I met her daughter Margaret yesterday. She had some old photographs." "Margaret?" Richard's eyes lit up. "How is she? Still teaching at that elementary school? You know her?" "Of course. Used to come to the diner after school, do her homework at the counter while May worked. Smart kid, always had her nose in a book." Richard paused, a shadow crossing his face. "May remortgaged her house to help. Put that girl through college, you know." Eastwood leaned forward. "Tell me more about May. Everything you remember." Richard's eyes grew distant, fingers unconsciously tapping out a rhythm on his armrest. "I was playing in jazz clubs back then, trying to make it big. Had a quartet, decent enough musicians, but we couldn't get any real gigs. May let us play at the diner on weekend nights. Said it would class up the joint." He chuckled softly. "What we didn't know was that she was inviting every club owner and music promoter she knew to come eat during our sets. Somehow convinced them they'd discovered us all on their own. Got our first real contract that way, 6 months at the Blue Room downtown." "She never told you?" "Nah, that wasn't May's style. Found out years later from one of the promoters who'd become a friend. By then, May just smiled when I tried to thank her, said she was just doing what needed doing." Tommy, who had been quietly absorbing everything, finally spoke up. "Sounds like she had a gift for seeing potential in people." "That she did," Richard agreed. "And not just artists and musicians. There was this kid, Carlos, used to sweep the parking lot for spare change. May hired him to wash dishes. Same job you had." He nodded toward Eastwood. "Found out he was good. With numbers, got him enrolled in night classes at the community college. Last I heard, he was a CFO at some tech company in San Jose." Eastwood pulled out his phone, making notes. "Would you happen to have any contact information for Carlos?" Better than that, Richard stood, moving to a cluttered desk in the corner. "I've got a whole address book here somewhere. May's people. We kind of kept in touch over the years. Had a little reunion when she retired in '89. He rummaged through drawers until he found a battered leather notebook. "Here we go. Carlos Mendoza, Sarah Chen. She's a gallery owner now. May helped her put on her first art show in the diner's back room. Oh, and you've got to talk to Dr. James Wilson." "The name's not familiar," Eastwood admitted. "Jimmy Wilson." Back then, used to read medical textbooks at the counter, said he was going to be a doctor someday. His folks couldn't afford college, but somehow, Richard gave them a meaningful look. He got a scholarship to UC Berkeley, runs a free clinic in East Oakland now. As Richard listed more names, Eastwood and Tommy exchanged glances. What had started as a simple scholarship idea was evolving into something larger. A web of lives touched and transformed by one woman's quiet generosity. "Mind if I borrow that address book?" Eastwood asked. "I'd like to talk to as many of these people as possible." Richard handed it over without hesitation. "Take it. But first, you've got to tell me, what are you planning?" Eastwood shared his idea for the May Thompson Arts Fellowship, watching as Richard's eyes grew bright with understanding. "A fellowship program. That's good. That's real good. But you know what would make it better?" Richard stood again, this time moving to a wall covered in photographs. He pointed to one showing a young woman at a piano. "See her? That's my granddaughter. She teaches music here 3 days a week, helps kids who can't afford regular lessons. May taught us it's not enough just to chase your own dreams. You've got to help others chase theirs, too." "What are you suggesting?" "Make it more than just financial aid. Build in a mentorship component. Connect established artists, musicians, actors with young dreamers. Create a community, like May did in that diner." Tommy, who had been quietly observing, suddenly spoke up. "Like a chain reaction of kindness." "Exactly," Richard said, warming to the idea. "And I know just about everyone in that address book would want to be part of it. We all owe May something we can never repay, but maybe we can pay it forward." Eastwood was already making notes on his phone. "We'll need a board of directors, people who understood May's vision." "Count me in," Richard said immediately. "And I know Sarah and Carlos would jump at the chance. Dr. Wilson, too. He already mentors pre-med students from disadvantaged backgrounds." The morning light had shifted to afternoon as they talked, dust motes dancing in the sunbeams that streamed through the shop's windows. Finally, Eastwood stood, extending his hand to Richard. "Thank you for this," he said, holding up the address book. "We'll be in touch about the board position." Richard shook his head, grinning. "Never thought I'd see the day Clint Eastwood would be helping carry on May Thompson's legacy. She'd have gotten a kick out of that." As they headed back to the Thunderbird, Tommy noticed Eastwood's expression, a mixture of determination and something softer, almost vulnerable. "You okay?" he asked, as they pulled away from the curb. "Yeah," Eastwood replied, though his voice was rough. "Just thinking about how many stories like this are out there, how many lives she touched that we don't even know about yet." Tommy checked the address book. "Well, according to this, Dr. Wilson's clinic is just a few miles from here. Want to make one more stop before heading back?" Eastwood nodded, guiding the classic car through Oakland's streets. "You know what May used to say whenever anyone tried to thank her?" "What's that?" "Kindness isn't a debt to be repaid. It's a light to be passed on." Took me 47 years to understand what she meant. Dr. James Wilson's free clinic occupied a renovated Victorian house in East Oakland, its faded blue paint and well-tended garden standing in stark contrast to the urban landscape surrounding it. A hand-painted sign in the window read, "Wilson Community Health, Everyone Welcome," in both English and Spanish. As Eastwood and Tommy approached the entrance, a steady stream of patients moved in and out, mothers with children, elderly couples, supporting each other, young workers still in uniforms from various service jobs. Nobody gave the legendary actor a second glance. Here, celebrity meant little compared to the basic needs of everyday survival. The reception area was crowded but orderly, with well-worn chairs and walls covered in health education posters in multiple languages. A young receptionist looked up from her computer, her professional smile freezing slightly as she recognized Eastwood. "We're here to see Dr. Wilson," Eastwood said quietly, trying to minimize attention. "It's about May Thompson." The name worked like magic. The receptionist's eyes widened and she immediately reached for a phone. "Dr. Wilson, there's someone here. Yes, about May. You might want to come up front yourself for this one." Moments. Later, a tall African-American man in his 60s emerged from a back hallway. His white coat was slightly rumpled and reading glasses hung from his neck on a chain. He stopped short at the sight of Eastwood, but his surprise quickly gave way to understanding. "May's Diner," he said, extending his hand. "You were the dishwasher who became a movie star. I remember you, though we never really talked back then. I was usually too busy hiding behind my textbooks." Eastwood shook his hand firmly. "Jimmy Wilson. Richard Martinez said we needed to talk to you." Dr. Wilson glanced around the crowded waiting room, then at his watch. "Give me an hour to finish with my scheduled patients. There's a coffee shop around the corner, Alma's. Meet me there?" The suggested coffee shop turned out to be another piece of May's legacy. Alma, the owner, had been a teenage waitress at Eid Sihin, the diner, in its final years. When she recognized Eastwood and heard why he was there, she closed the shop early to give them privacy. "May changed my life, too," she explained, serving them coffee in heavy ceramic mugs that could have come straight from the diner. "Taught me everything I know about running a business. Said the secret wasn't in the coffee or the food. It was in making people feel like they belonged." When Dr. Wilson arrived an hour later, Alma joined them at the table, eager to be part of the conversation. The doctor removed his white coat, revealing a neat button-down shirt and tie, and accepted a cup of coffee with visible gratitude. "Long day?" Tommy asked. "They're all long days," Wilson replied without complaint. "But that's how we honor May's memory, isn't it? By doing what needs doing." Eastwood leaned forward. "Tell me about your time at the diner. How did May help you?" Wilson's face softened with memory. "I was 17, working as a stock boy at the grocery store next door. Used to spend my lunch breaks at May's counter, studying. My parents—" He paused, collecting his thoughts. "They were good people, worked hard all their lives. Dad was a janitor, Mom did domestic work. They encouraged my dreams of becoming a doctor, but there was no money for college." He took a sip of coffee, gathering his thoughts. "One day, May asked me what I was reading. It was an anatomy textbook I'd borrowed from the library. We got to talking about my plans, my parents' situation. Next thing I know, she's telling me about this scholarship program she'd heard about. Said she'd help me with the application." "But there was no program, was there?" Eastwood asked, already knowing the answer. "No," Wilson smiled. "Found that out years later. May had contacted every doctor she knew through the diner, and she knew plenty, being near the hospital. Convinced them to pool resources for a community scholarship. Even got my first internship that way, though again, I didn't know her hand was in it until much later." Alma, who had been listening intently, chimed in. "That was May's special gift. She could see what people needed and figure out how to make it happen without anyone feeling like they were accepting charity." "Exactly," Wilson agreed. "She made everyone feel like they were part of something bigger than themselves. The doctors who contributed to my scholarship, they ended up creating a real program after me, helping other disadvantaged students pursue medical careers. 23 doctors have come through that program now, and every one of them commits to working in underserved communities." Eastwood shared his plans for the May Thompson Arts Fellowship, including Richard Martinez's suggestion about mentorship. Wilson listened intently, occasionally nodding. "You'll need more than just artists and performers," he said finally. May's vision was bigger than any one field. She believed everyone deserved a chance to pursue their dreams, whether that meant becoming an actor, a doctor, or opening a coffee shop. He smiled at Alma. "What are you suggesting?" Tommy asked. "Expanded. Create the May Thompson Legacy Foundation. Different branches for different fields. Arts, medicine, business, education. Keep the core principle of combining financial support with mentorship and community service." Eastwood was already taking notes on his phone. "That would require significant Funding. Count me and my colleagues in, Wilson said without hesitation. We've been looking for ways to expand our scholarship program anyway, and I know plenty of successful professionals who'd jump at the chance to pay forward what May did for them. It's not just about the money, though, Alma added. May's real gift was creating connections, building community. Any foundation in her name needs to capture that spirit. Wilson nodded enthusiastically. She used to say that dreams don't grow in isolation. They need a whole garden to flourish. The diner was that garden for us. This foundation needs to create similar spaces. As they talked, the idea began to take shape. The foundation would need a physical headquarters, somewhere that could serve as both administrative offices and community space. Programs would include not just financial support but also mentorship networks, community service requirements, and ongoing support for recipients. What about the old diner location? Tommy suggested. Could be symbolic, starting where May did. Wilson shook his head. It's a parking lot now, but he trailed off thinking. The Victorian next door to the clinic is for sale. Been empty for years. With some renovation, it could be perfect. Meeting rooms, offices, maybe even a cafe on the ground floor. Like a modern version of May's Diner, Alma said softly. A place where dreams can take root. Eastwood was quiet for a moment, processing everything. When he spoke, his voice was determined. We'll need to move fast. I want to announce this at the Carmel Film Festival's closing ceremony next week. Make it public, get others involved. That's in 6 days, Tommy pointed out. Then we've got work to do. Eastwood turned to Wilson. Can you reach out to your medical colleagues, see who's interested in being involved? And, Alma, would you be willing to help design the community space concept? Both nodded eagerly. Wilson pulled out his phone. I can have a meeting set up with key medical professionals by tomorrow afternoon. Many of them knew May, even if they didn't know the full extent of what she did. I've got some ideas about the space already, Alma added. Been dreaming about expanding my coffee shop into something more community-focused. This could be perfect. As they continued planning, none of them noticed the young woman who had slipped into the coffee shop earlier and was sitting quietly in a corner, recording everything on her phone. Diana Foster, junior reporter for the Oakland Tribune, had been working on a story about Dr. Wilson's clinic when she overheard the name May Thompson. Her mother had been one of May's regulars, and the story she was witnessing felt like destiny. The next morning, while Eastwood and his growing team were meeting with potential foundation board members, Diana's article went live on the Tribune's website. Hollywood Legends' Secret Past. The Waitress Who Changed Lives. The story spread like wildfire across social media. By noon, major news outlets were picking it up. May Thompson's daughter Margaret was suddenly inundated with interview requests. Former diner regulars began coming forward with their own stories of May's quiet generosity. Eastwood was in the middle of a meeting with architects about the Victorian property when Tommy burst in, holding up his phone. We've got a situation, he said, showing Eastwood the trending headlines. Everyone knows about May now. Eastwood scanned the article quickly, his expression unreadable. The piece was well written, capturing May's spirit and the impact of her quiet generosity without sensationalizing. Still, this wasn't how he'd planned to announce the foundation. Get everyone together, he said finally. Wilson, Martinez, Margaret, all of them. We need to get ahead of this. Within hours, the Victorian's empty living room had been transformed into an impromptu meeting space. Margaret Thompson sat in a central armchair surrounded by people whose lives her mother had touched. Diana Foster had been invited too, her original article having set the day's events in motion. I'm sorry, Diana began, but Margaret cut her off with a gentle smile. Don't be. Mom never wanted recognition for herself, but she would have loved knowing that her story might inspire others to help people chase their dreams. Eastwood stood by the room's bay window, watching the group. The afternoon sun cast long shadows. across the worn hardwood floors, and for a moment he could almost imagine they were back in May's diner, planning out their futures over coffee and pie. "Maybe this is better," he said finally. "May's story shouldn't be announced at a film festival. It should grow organically, just like everything else she did." Wilson nodded. "The phone's been ringing nonstop at the clinic. People wanting to help, to be part of whatever we're building here. And it's not just local," Tommy added, checking his phone. "The story's gone national. Sheikert May's legacy is trending on Twitter." Margaret wiped tears from her eyes. Mom would have hated all this attention, but she would have loved seeing everyone coming together like this. As if to prove her point, the doorbell rang. Tommy went to answer it and returned with Carlos Mendoza, the former parking lot sweeper turned CFO, and Sarah Chen, the gallery owner. Both had dropped everything to drive up from San Jose after seeing the article. "We saw the story," Carlos said, still in his business suit. "Had to come. May, she gave me my future. Whatever you're planning, I'm in." Sarah nodded agreement. "My gallery's doing a special exhibition next month. Local artists from disadvantaged backgrounds. Was already planning to dedicate it to May's memory, but now..." The ideas began flowing. Faster. Sarah proposed an art auction to raise initial funding for the foundation. Carlos offered to handle the financial structuring and reach out to potential corporate donors. Dr. Wilson's medical colleagues were already pledging support for a healthcare education branch. Diana sat in a corner, taking notes, occasionally, wiping her eyes. The story had grown far beyond her original article, taking on a life of its own. She watched as Eastwood moved through the room, listening more than talking, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "I've been thinking about what May would want, how she'd want us to handle this moment." The room fell silent, waiting. "She never wanted recognition," he continued, "never wanted anyone to feel indebted to her. What she wanted was for people to believe in themselves and then help others do the same. So maybe instead of making this about her, we make it about that principle." "What are you suggesting?" Margaret asked. "We call it the garden," he said, referencing May's philosophy about dreams needing a garden to flourish. "Different programs, arts, medicine, business, whatever else we add, can be different parts of the garden. But the focus stays on growing, dreams, building community, passing on kindness. And May's story," Diana asked quietly, "becomes the inspiration, not the centerpiece. Every person who receives support through the garden will learn about May, understand the legacy they're part of, but the spotlight stays on the dreams being grown, not the gardener who started it all." Margaret stood and hugged Eastwood, tears flowing freely now. That's exactly what she would have wanted. The energy in the room shifted, became more focused. People broke into groups, planning different aspects of the project. Carlos and his team worked on financial structures. Sarah and other artists began designing the space. Dr. Wilson and his colleagues outlined medical education programs. As the sun began to set, casting the room in golden light, Eastwood found himself standing next to Margaret by the bay window. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for this, but for understanding who Mom really was." Eastwood nodded, watching the room full of people working to grow May's garden. "I was wrong to walk away at the festival," he admitted, "but maybe that moment needed to happen to bring us here." Outside, the neighborhood was coming alive with evening activity. Children played on the sidewalk while parents returned from work. The clinic next door was still open, its lights promising help and hope to anyone who needed it. "You know what Mom would say right now?" Margaret asked, smiling through her tears. "What's that?" "Enough talking. There's work to be done." Eastwood chuckled. "She would say that, wouldn't she? Well then, let's get to work." The next morning dawned with a sense of urgency that seemed to electrify the air. The Victorian, which just yesterday had been empty, was now a hive of activity. Volunteers had brought in folding tables and chairs, setting up makeshift workstations throughout the house. The walls, still showing patches where pictures had once hung, were now covered with large sheets of paper filled with plans, diagrams, and growing lists of names. Eastwood arrived early, carrying a box of pastries from Alma's coffee shop. He found Tommy already there, coordinating with a team of contractors who were assessing the building's renovation needs. "How bad is it?" Eastwood asked, setting down the pastries. Tommy consulted his notes. "Structure's solid, but will need significant updates to meet code for a public building. Electrical, plumbing, accessibility requirements. The good news is, Carlos found us a contractor who was one of May's regulars. He's offering to do the work at cost." The contractor in question, Mike Ramirez, was examining the grand staircase with professional interest. "May let me run my first business out of a corner of her diner," he explained when introduced to Eastwood. "Had my estimates and invoices spread out on the counter during the slow hours. She'd help me with the math, taught me about customer service." He patted the carved banister. "This old girl needs some love, but we'll make her shine again." By mid-morning, the house was filled with people, each focused on different aspects of the project. In what had once been a formal dining room, Dr. Wilson and his medical colleagues were developing the healthcare education program. The living room had become Sarah Chen's domain, where she and other artists were planning the cultural spaces. The kitchen, fittingly, was Alma's headquarters for designing the community cafe. Margaret Thompson moved between groups, sharing stories about her mother that helped shape each program's development. She paused near Eastwood, who was reviewing renovation plans with Mike. "Mom would love this," she said, gesturing at the organized chaos around them. "But she'd also say, we're thinking, too small." Eastwood looked up, interested. "What do you mean?" "Well, look at how she operated. The diner was her base, yes, but her network spread throughout Oakland. She knew which doctors might mentor a promising student, which business owners might give someone their first job, which teachers might offer extra tutoring. She created connections everywhere she went." Tommy, who had been listening nearby, joined them. "So, you're suggesting we need to think beyond this building?" "Exactly. The garden should be more than just a place. It should be a network, a way of connecting people who need help with those who can provide it." As if on cue, Diana Foster arrived carrying her laptop. "You're going to want to see this," she said, pulling up various social media sites. "People all over the country are sharing stories about May. Not just people who knew her directly, but people who were helped by someone May helped. It's like ripples in a pond." They gathered around her screen, reading the stories. A doctor in Chicago who'd been inspired by one of May's medical students to start a free clinic. A restaurant owner in Boston who'd learned about May's philosophy of community building and transformed his establishment into a gathering place for local artists. A teacher in Atlanta who'd created a scholarship program based on May's principles. "This is exactly what I mean," Margaret said excitedly. "The garden isn't just about creating one space. It's about spreading May's way of doing things, her philosophy of quiet help and community building." Eastwood was quiet for a moment, processing this expanded vision. "We'll need a way to coordinate it all, to connect people who want to help with those who need it." Carlos, who had been passing by with a stack of financial documents, stopped. "I might have an idea about that. My company's been developing a social networking platform focused on community service and mentorship. It's still in beta, but with some modifications." "Could you adapt it for this?" Tommy asked. "Better than that, I can dedicate a team to building something specifically for the garden, a platform that connects mentors with mentees, tracks available, resources, facilitates community building across different locations." The idea quickly gained momentum. Sarah Chen suggested incorporating virtual gallery spaces where artists could showcase their work and connect with mentors. Dr. Wilson saw possibilities for telemedicine consultations and online medical education resources. Alma proposed a section for sharing community building strategies and success stories. As they discussed the possibilities, Mike Ramirez called Eastwood over to look at something in the basement. What they found changed the project's scope entirely. "Look at this," Mike said, shining his flashlight on a series of old photographs tacked to a corkboard. They showed the Victorian in its original state when it had been a community center in the early 1900s. "This place has always been about bringing people together. We're just bringing it full circle." The photographs sparked a new round of ideas. Instead of simply renovating the Victorian to modern standards, they could restore some of its original features: the community gathering spaces, the education rooms, the gardens that had once surrounded it. "But we'll need to buy the adjacent lot for parking," Mike pointed out. "And if we're really going to do this right, we should consider acquiring the building next door, too. Create a real campus. The cost would be significant, but Carlos was already making calls. By lunch, he had commitments from several tech companies interested in supporting the project. Sarah Chen had reached out to her gallery contacts, securing promises for art donations that could be auctioned to raise funds. Dr. Wilson's medical network was pledging both financial support and professional services. Telling and preparing. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As the day progressed, the project's scope continued to expand, but always in ways that felt true to May's principles. Every new idea was measured against the simple question: would May do it this way? In the late afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived. Alice Chen, Tommy's mother, walked through the door carrying several large photo albums. "I saw the article," she explained, setting the albums on a table. "May and I were friends. We used to talk about our dreams for the community." She opened one album, revealing photographs of community events at the diner: holiday celebrations, graduation parties, impromptu gatherings that had brought the neighborhood together. "Mom, you never told me you knew May," Tommy said, surprised. Alice smiled. "There are many things about May that none of us knew. She helped so many people, but she also had this bigger vision. She believed that when you help someone achieve their dreams, you're not just changing one life, you're changing the future for everyone that person will touch." The photographs provided new inspiration. They showed how May had used the diner not just as a place to serve food, but as a community hub where people from different backgrounds could come together, share their stories, and help each other. "Look at this one," Alice said, pointing to a photo of a crowded diner during what appeared to be a celebration. This was when Jimmy, Dr. Wilson now, got accepted to medical school. May closed the diner early and threw him a party. But it wasn't just a party. She invited other young people who were interested in medicine, connected them with doctors who were there, created opportunities right in the middle of the celebration. Margaret nodded, wiping away tears. That was Mom's special gift. She could see possibilities in people and situations that others missed, and she knew how to bring the right people together at the right moment. As they studied the photographs, Eastwood noticed something interesting. In almost every shot of a significant moment, a celebration, a meeting, a quiet conversation that looked important, May herself was barely visible, usually in the background, or at the edges of the frame. She never wanted to be the center of attention, Margaret explained, seeing where he was looking. She always said the spotlight should be on the dreamers, not the dream helpers. This observation led to an important discussion about how the garden should operate. While May's story would inspire and guide the project, the focus would always be on the people being helped and the communities being built. Diana, who had been taking notes all day, suggested creating a documentary series about the people helped by the garden, focusing on their journeys and how they, in turn, help others. "It's not about creating a monument to May," she explained, "but about showing how her way of doing things creates lasting, positive change." The idea resonated with everyone. It would be a way to share May's philosophy without turning her into a figurehead, to inspire others while keeping the focus on the ongoing work of helping dreams grow. As evening approached, the various teams began presenting their developed plans. The medical education program, led by Dr. Wilson, would include scholarships for medical students committed to serving underserved communities, mentorship networks connecting experienced healthcare providers with students, community health education initiatives, free clinic services integrated with training opportunities, mental health support services. The Arts and Culture program, coordinated by Sarah Chen, would feature gallery spaces for emerging artists, performance venues for musicians and actors, workshop areas for various artistic disciplines, recording and practice facilities, cultural education programs for youth. The business development program, overseen by Carlos, would provide entrepreneurship training and mentorship micro-lending programs, business plan development support, networking opportunities, technical assistance for small businesses. The Community Engagement Program, developed by Alma and Alice, would include the cafe and community gathering spaces, educational workshops and classes, cultural celebration events, community service coordination, intergenerational programming. The technology platform, being developed by Carlos's team, would tie everything together: mentor-mentee matching system, resource sharing network, virtual learning spaces, community building tools, success story sharing platform. As they reviewed these plans, Margaret shared one final photograph she'd found in her mother's belongings. It showed May standing in front of the diner on her first day of ownership, looking both nervous and determined. She wrote something on the back, Margaret said, turning over the photo. The faded handwriting read, "Dreams are like seeds. They need good soil, careful tending, and a whole community of other growing things around them to really flourish." Eastwood studied the photograph for a long moment. "That's what we're building here," he said finally. "Not just a place or a program, but a whole ecosystem for growing dreams." The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the Victorians' windows, but no one seemed ready to leave. There was an energy in the air, a sense of being part of something important and meaningful. Tommy, who had been quietly observing most of the day, suddenly spoke up. "You know what we haven't discussed yet? The opening. How do we launch this in a way that honors May's spirit?" The question sparked a new round of discussion. Traditional grand openings with ribbon-cutting ceremonies and speeches seemed wrong for something inspired by May's quiet way of helping. "What if," Alma suggested, "instead of a grand opening, we have a community dinner, like the celebrations May used to host at the diner? We invite everyone who's been involved, everyone who's been sharing stories, everyone who wants to be part of the garden's future. And instead of speeches," Sarah added, "we have people share their dreams, connect with others who can help make them reality. Start the garden's work right from the first moment." The idea perfectly captured May's approach to community building. Plans began forming for a series of opening events that would focus on connecting people and launching new dreams rather than ceremonial celebrations. As the meeting finally wound down, Eastwood found himself standing on the Victorians' front porch with Margaret, looking out at the neighborhood that would soon be transformed by the garden's presence. "You know," Margaret said softly, "Mom used to say that the real magic of helping others isn't in the big gestures, but in the small moments when someone realizes they're not alone in their dreams." Eastwood nodded, thinking of that long-ago moment when May had handed him an envelope that changed his life. "We're building something bigger than any of us," he said, "but we're doing it May's way. One dream, one connection, one act of kindness at a time." The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity, each hour bringing new challenges and unexpected developments. The Victorian, now draped in scaffolding and surrounded by construction equipment, had become the center of what local media was calling the May movement. Eastwood arrived early on the 4th day, coffee in hand, to find the sidewalk all ready. filled with people. Some were contractors arriving for work on the renovation, others were community members offering to help, and still others were there to share their own stories of how May had touched their lives. Inside, the house was transforming. The formal parlor had become a command center, with laptops, blueprints, and planning boards covering every surface. Tommy sat at what had once been an antique writing desk, coordinating the day's activities with military precision. "We've got a situation," he said as Eastwood entered. "A good one, but complicated." "What kind of situation?" Tommy pulled up an email on his laptop. "Remember how Diana's article went viral? Well, it caught the attention of some people in Washington. The Department of Education wants to use the garden as a model for a national community development initiative." Eastwood frowned slightly. May would have hated government bureaucracy getting involved. "That's what I thought too. But listen to this. They don't want to take over or control anything. They want to learn from what May did. Understand how her approach could be applied in other communities. They're offering matching funds for similar projects in other cities, but with local control and autonomy." Before Eastwood could respond, Dr. Wilson burst in, his usual calm demeanor replaced by excited energy. "You need to see this," he said, leading them to what would become the Medical Education Center. The room was filled with medical students from nearby universities, all volunteers who had heard about the garden. They were setting up a temporary clinic, preparing to offer free health screenings to the community. "These students," Wilson explained, "they're not just here to help. They're here to learn May's way of practicing medicine, treating the whole person, understanding the community, building trust. They want to make this part of their medical education." Similar scenes were playing out throughout the building. In the future art space, Sarah Chen was working with a group of young artists to create a mural celebrating May's legacy. The design incorporated elements from all the stories they'd collected: the diner, the medical students, the entrepreneurs, the dreamers of all kinds who had found support and encouragement through May's quiet intervention. Carlos had taken over the library, transforming it into a technology hub. His team was developing the garden's digital platform, but they'd also created something unexpected: a storytelling booth where people could record their memories of May and their own dreams. For the future, the algorithm we're developing, he explained to Eastwood, doesn't just match mentors with mentees. It looks for patterns in people's stories, finds unexpected connections, like how May used to introduce people who didn't know they could help each other. In the kitchen, Alma was training a group of young people in barista skills, but she was teaching more than just coffee making. May understood that a cafe isn't just about serving food and drinks, she told them. It's about creating a space where people feel welcome, where conversations can happen, where communities can grow. Margaret spent her mornings going through the growing collection of stories people were sharing about her mother. She'd set up a small desk in what would become the community room, surrounded by photographs and letters. "Every day we learn about something else she did," she told Eastwood, showing him a letter that had arrived that morning. "This is from a woman in Seattle. Mom helped her son get into music school back in '82. He's a conductor now, runs a youth orchestra program in underserved communities. Says he got the idea from how Mom used to organize impromptu concerts at the diner." The construction work was proceeding at a remarkable pace, thanks to Mike Ramirez's crew working around the clock. They'd discovered original features hidden under years of renovations: beautiful hardwood floors, intricate moldings, even stained glass windows that had been covered over. "We're not just restoring a building," Mike said during the daily progress meeting. "We're bringing back its soul. This place was built to bring people together, and that's what it's going to do again." The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Robert Martinez, Richard's grandson and a successful software developer. He'd driven up from Silicon Valley after hearing about the garden's technology platform. "I want to help develop the mentorship matching system," he told Carlos. "I've been working on AI algorithms for social connection, and I think I know how we can scale May's ability to see potential connections between people." As Robert explained his ideas, Eastwood was struck by how May's influence continued to multiply across generations. Here was the grandson of a jazz musician she'd helped, using technology that hadn't existed in May's time to extend her way of helping people. The day's biggest challenge came during the community meeting that evening. The Victorian's future ballroom, still under renovation, had been cleared enough to hold about 50 people. Representatives from various local organizations had come to discuss how the garden could work with existing community programs. "We love what you're doing," said Elena Rodriguez, director of a local youth center. "But we need to make sure this doesn't become something that's imposed on the community from outside." May understood the importance of working with what's already here, building on existing relationships. It was a valid concern, and it led to a lengthy discussion about how the garden could support and enhance existing community initiatives rather than replacing them. The solution came from an unexpected source: Alice Chen, Tommy's mother. May never tried to run everything herself, she reminded them. She was a connector, a facilitator. The garden should work the same way. Instead of creating new programs that might compete with what's already working, we create partnerships, build bridges, share resources. This insight led to a restructuring of the garden's operational plan. Instead of centralized programs, they would create a hub-and-spoke model, with the garden serving as a central resource and connection point for existing community organizations. The medical program would partner with local clinics and health centers, providing resources and support, rather than competing for patients. The arts program would work with existing cultural organizations, offering space and resources while respecting their autonomy. The business development program would collaborate with local chambers of commerce and business associations. "This is exactly how May would have done it," Margaret said, watching the various community leaders work out collaborative agreements. She never wanted to be in charge. She wanted to help everyone be better at what they were already doing. As the meeting wound down, Diana Foster, who had been documenting everything for her ongoing series about the garden, asked Eastwood how he felt about the project's evolution. "It's bigger than anything I imagined when I first saw that photograph," he admitted. "But it's also exactly what it should be." May understood something most people miss: that real change happens through relationships, through connections, through people helping people in ways that preserve dignity and build community. The next morning brought new challenges and opportunities. A group of architecture students from UC Berkeley had arrived, eager to help with the restoration work. They'd brought proposals for how the Victorian's gardens could be restored and expanded into community green spaces. "We found the original landscape plans in the university archives," their professor explained, spreading out blueprints. The property used to include Victory Gardens during World War II, and before that it had meditation gardens and community gathering spaces. This historical connection sparked new ideas. The adjacent lot, which they'd been planning to use for parking, could instead become a community garden space. Underground parking could be built beneath it, preserving the surface for green space. Sarah Chen immediately saw the artistic possibilities. "We could create outdoor gallery spaces, performance areas, places for public art, make it a living, growing extension of the garden's mission." The garden plans led to another important discussion about sustainability. Carlos brought in environmental experts who suggested incorporating green building technologies into the renovation: solar panels, rainwater collection systems, energy-efficient systems. May was all about sustainability, Margaret reminded them. Not just environmental sustainability, but sustainable communities, sustainable change. She understood that helping people had to be done in ways that could continue and grow over time. This principle began influencing every aspect of the garden's development. The technology platform included features for resource sharing and community cooperation. The medical program incorporated preventive care and health education. The business development program emphasized long-term planning and community investment. By mid-afternoon, the Victorian was hosting another kind of gathering. Local teachers had organized a meeting to discuss how the garden could support education initiatives. They brought stories about how May had helped students over the years, paying for books, arranging tutoring, finding ways to keep kids in school when families struggled. "We need to think beyond traditional education," said Maria Santos, a veteran teacher who had known May. May understood that learning happens everywhere, not just in classrooms. She turned her diner into a learning space. Kids did homework there, people learned job skills. Everyone was both teacher and student in some way. This insight led to plans for creating flexible learning spaces throughout the garden. The library would include study areas and computer labs. The cafe would have space for homework help and tutoring. Even the gardens would be designed as outdoor classrooms. As the day progressed, more people arrived with stories and ideas. A group of former diner regulars had organized to create an oral history project, recording memories of May and the community she had built. Local business owners offered to create apprenticeship programs, carrying on May's tradition of helping people learn practical skills. The construction crew made an exciting discovery while working on the basement, a time capsule from 1923, when the Victorian had first been converted into a community center. Inside were photographs, letters, and a handwritten mission statement that could have been written by May herself. "This house is dedicated to the proposition that every person deserves a chance to grow, to learn, to become their best self. It shall be a place where help is given freely, where community is built daily, and where hope is always at home." The discovery felt like a confirmation that they were on the right path. The Victorian had always been meant for this purpose. They were simply bringing it back to its original mission, updated for modern times but true to its core values. As evening approached, Eastwood found himself in what would become the garden's main entrance hall. The space was still rough with exposed beams and unfinished walls, but he could see what it would become. The original woodwork was being restored, and light from the newly uncovered stained glass windows cast colorful patterns across the floor. Tommy joined him, clipboard in hand. "Thinking deep thoughts?" "Just wondering what May would make of all this," Eastwood replied. "It's grown so much bigger than paying back a personal debt." "Maybe that's the point," Tommy suggested. May never saw helping others as a debt to be repaid. She saw it as a way of living, a way of building something larger than herself. Margaret appeared in the doorway, holding another photograph she'd discovered. This one showed May on her last day at the diner, surrounded by people whose lives she'd touched. "You know what Mom said that day?" Margaret asked, joining them. "Someone tried to thank her for everything she'd done, and she just smiled and said, 'Don't thank me. Promise me you'll help someone else when you can.' That's how we build the world we want to live in." The three stood in silence for a moment, watching the sunset paint the walls with light from the stained glass windows. Outside, they could hear the sounds of the neighborhood, children playing, people talking, cars passing. Soon, these sounds would be joined by the activities of the garden, classes being taught, music being played, dreams being shared and supported. "We're not just building a place," Eastwood said finally. "We're building a movement, aren't we? A way of helping that can spread and grow, just like May's influence has." "That's exactly what we're building," Margaret agreed. And somewhere, Mom is probably saying, "Enough talking," they all finished together. "There's work to be done." The revelation came on a quiet Sunday morning, 5 days before the garden's planned opening. Eastwood arrived early, as had become his habit, to find Margaret sitting alone in the Victorian's library surrounded by boxes of old documents. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled slightly as she held what appeared to be an ancient ledger. "Margaret, what's wrong?" She looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of shock and something else, wonder, perhaps, or disbelief. "I found something," she said quietly. Something that changes everything we thought we knew about Mom in this place. Tommy arrived just then, carrying his usual stack of planning documents. Seeing their expressions, he set everything down and closed the library door. "The Victorian," Margaret began, her voice steadying. "We thought it was just a coincidence that it was available, that it had this history of being a community center. But look at this." She opened the ledger, pointing to a series of entries dating back to 1957. The ledger showed regular payments from Mae Thompson to a trust fund, small amounts at first, growing larger over the years. The trust's purpose was listed simply as the Garden Fund. "There's more," Margaret continued, spreading out other documents she'd discovered. Mom didn't just help people randomly. She had a plan, a vision she worked on for decades. And this building? She bought it 30 years ago, through a corporation she set up specifically for this purpose. Eastwood and Tommy exchanged stunned looks. "But the building was abandoned," Tommy said. "It's been empty for years." "Because she was waiting," Margaret explained, her voice growing stronger as she pieced it all together. "Look at these notes, these letters. She was creating a network, building connections, preparing for something bigger. She knew that helping people one at a time wasn't enough. She wanted to create a system that could continue her work on a larger scale." She pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed with age, addressed simply, "To be opened when the garden begins to grow." With trembling fingers, Margaret broke the seal and began to read. "To whoever finds this letter, if you're reading this, it means something I've hoped for has finally begun. The garden isn't just a dream anymore. It's becoming real. I've spent my life helping people in small ways, but I've always known it wasn't enough. One person can only do so much. What we need is a way to multiply kindness, to create connections that grow and spread on their own. This building isn't just a building. It's the seed I've been nurturing all these years. The diner was my testing ground, where I learned how to help people in ways that preserved their dignity and inspired them to help others. But this is where that idea can grow into something bigger. I've left everything prepared: the legal framework, the initial funding, the network of people who understand the vision. But I didn't want to build it myself. The garden needed to grow organically, to be shaped by the community it serves. In this building's basement, behind the north wall of the old coal room, you'll find a safe. The combination is the date I opened. The diner. Inside is everything you need: legal documents, account information, and most importantly, a list of names. These are people I've helped over the years who promised to help build the garden when the time came. But here's what matters most. The garden isn't mine. It belongs to everyone who believes in the power of helping others, of building connections, of growing dreams. My role was just to plant the seed and prepare the soil. Take what I've left and make it grow, but remember, the most important things can't be written in ledgers or locked in safes. They're the connections between people. The moments when someone realizes they're not alone in their dreams. The quiet victories that come from helping others succeed. With hope and faith in what's to come. Mae Thompson. The library fell silent as Margaret finished reading. Outside, they could hear the normal sounds of Sunday morning: birds singing, distant church bells, the occasional car passing. But inside, time seemed to have stopped. Eastwood was the first to move, heading for the basement with determined strides. The others followed. The coal room, which they'd been planning to convert into a storage area, was dark and dusty. Mike's crew hadn't started work here yet. The north wall looked solid, but when they examined it closely, they found what they were looking for: a section of brick that sounded hollow when tapped. It took them 20 minutes to carefully remove the false wall, revealing a professional-grade safe built into the foundation. Margaret entered the date: 4/15/1957. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside, they found exactly what Mae's letter had promised: legal documents showing ownership of the Victorian and several surrounding properties, bank accounts containing funds that had grown steadily over decades, and, most importantly, a thick folder containing hundreds of names, each with notes about their skills, dreams, and promises made. As they began going through the names, they realized something extraordinary. Many of the people they'd already involved in the garden project were on May's list: Dr. Wilson, Carlos Mendoza, Sarah Chen, even Mike Ramirez. She had helped each of them, and each had promised to help build something bigger when the time came. She orchestrated all of this, Tommy said, in amazement. Even from beyond, she brought us all together. Not orchestrated, Margaret corrected, reading through more of her mother's notes. She planted seeds. She knew that someday the right conditions would bring them all together to grow. The implications of their discovery began to sink in. The garden wasn't just an inspiration born from a chance encounter at a film festival. It was the culmination of decades of careful planning, of quiet work and patient preparation. But the biggest revelation came when they found a series of architectural plans dated 1987. May had commissioned detailed drawings for how the Victorian could be transformed into exactly what they were now creating: medical facilities, art spaces, educational centers, community gathering places. The plans even included the garden spaces the Berkeley students had proposed recreating. She saw it all, Eastwood said quietly. Everything we've been planning. She envisioned it decades ago. But she didn't build it herself, Margaret realized, reading through more of her mother's notes. She could have. She had the money, the plans, the connections. But she waited. Why? The answer came from another letter they found, this one addressed specifically to Margaret. My dearest daughter, if you're reading this, you've discovered my secret garden. I know you might wonder why I didn't tell you about this, why I didn't build it myself. The answer is simple. The garden couldn't be one person's creation. It needed to grow from the community itself, to be shaped by many hands and hearts. I spent my life planting seeds, helping people, creating connections, preparing the soil. But for the garden to truly flourish, it needed to grow naturally, to be discovered and developed by people who understood the need for it in their own ways. You might think I'm clever for planning all this, but the truth is, I just understood something simple. When you help people achieve their dreams, you create a kind of magic that multiplies itself. Every person I helped went on to help others, creating connections I could never have planned. The garden isn't my creation. It's the natural result of thousands of acts of kindness, of promises kept and dreams shared. My role was just to prepare the way, to make sure the resources would be there when the time was right. Take care of it, my darling. Let it grow in its own way. And remember, the best gardens are never finished. They change with the seasons, adapt to new conditions, and always have room for more dreams to take root. All my love, Mom. The discovery changed everything, and nothing. The garden's mission remained the same, but now they understood they were part of something larger, something that had been growing quietly for decades. The news spread quickly among the core team. That afternoon, they gathered in the Victorian's future community room to discuss what this meant for the project. We need to understand, Dr. Wilson said, that we're not just building something new. We're continuing something that's been growing for a long time. Carlos nodded, reviewing the financial documents. The resources May left, they're significant, but they're structured in a way that requires community involvement. She made sure the garden would always need people working together, contributing what they could. Sarah Chen had been going through the list of names, making connections. Look at this. She created a whole network of artists, educators, healthcare workers, business people. Each person she helped became a potential resource for helping others. But why keep it secret? Tommy asked. Why not tell people what she was planning? Margaret, who had been quietly reading more of her mother's papers, looked up. Because she understood something about how people work. If she had announced her plans, tried to organize everything herself, it would have become about her. By working, quietly, preparing the way but letting others discover the need for themselves, she made sure the garden would truly belong to the community. Eastwood had been silent for a while, thinking. "This changes our opening plans," he said finally. "We can't make this about discovering May's secret. That would go against everything she worked for." "So what do we do?" Tommy asked. "We acknowledge the foundation she laid, but we keep the focus where she wanted it, on the work itself, on the connections being made, on the dreams being grown." The team spent the rest of the day revising their plans, not to change the essence of what they were creating, but to better align with May's long-term vision. The garden would still be everything they had planned, but now they understood it was part of a larger story, a continuation rather than a beginning. As evening approached, Margaret found one final document in the safe, a simple notebook containing what appeared to be May's personal thoughts about the garden. The last entry, dated just months before her passing, read, "The hardest part of planting a garden is knowing you might not be there to see it bloom. But that's the beauty of it too. A garden doesn't belong to the person who plants it. It belongs to all who help it grow, all who find shelter in its shade, all who gather its fruits and plant new seeds of their own. I've prepared the soil as best I could. I've planted seeds in the form of helping others, creating connections, building trust. Now it's time to let nature take its course. The garden will grow when it's ready, when the right people come together with the right understanding. My part is done. The rest belongs to those who will discover it, those who will understand that helping others isn't just about individual acts of kindness. It's about creating spaces where kindness can multiply, where dreams can take root, where community can flourish. The garden isn't my legacy, it's everyone's future." The final days before the garden's opening took on a new intensity following the discovery of May's long-term vision. The Victorian hummed with activity around the clock as everyone worked to ensure the launch would honor both the spontaneous spirit of the project's beginning and the careful planning of its true origins. 3 days before the opening, Eastwood arrived to find the property transformed. The construction barriers had come down, revealing the Victorian in all its restored glory. The morning sun caught the cleaned stained glass windows, casting kaleidoscope patterns across the fresh-laid garden paths. Mike Ramirez and his crew had worked miracles, bringing the old building back to life while incorporating modern elements that would serve its new purpose. Inside, the changes were even more dramatic. The medical center was fully equipped, its walls adorned with both state-of-the-art medical displays and historical photographs of May's diner. The art spaces gleamed with perfect lighting and flexible display systems. The community rooms were furnished with a mix of restored antiques and contemporary pieces that somehow captured both the building's history and its future. But it was in the main entrance hall that the true spirit of the garden was most evident. Sarah Chen and her team had created an installation that told the story of community growth through a series of interconnected artistic elements. Photographs, letters, and artifacts from May's decades of quiet work were integrated with contemporary stories of hope and transformation. The effect was subtle but powerful. Visitors would understand they were entering a space where history was alive and still growing. Tommy found Eastwood studying the installation. "We've got a situation developing," he said, his tone suggesting both concern and excitement. Word about May's long-term planning has leaked somehow. Media's picking up the story, calling it the greatest act of anonymous philanthropy in history. Eastwood frowned. That's exactly what May didn't want. This was never about philanthropy. It was about community building. Exactly. But here's the interesting part. People are responding to the story in unexpected ways. We're getting calls from all over the country, but not just about May. People want to share their own stories of quiet helpers in their communities. It's like May's story is inspiring people to recognize and celebrate the hidden network of support that exists everywhere. Before Eastwood could respond, Carlos burst in, his usual corporate calm replaced by urgent excitement. "You need to see this," he said, pulling up data on his tablet. "The platform we developed? It's being flooded with registrations, not just from Oakland or California, from everywhere. People are creating local nodes, connecting existing community support networks. The garden is growing itself." Margaret joined them, carrying a stack of letters that had arrived that morning. "It's not just digital," she said. "We're getting mail from all over. People who knew Mom, people who were helped by people Mom helped, people who want to create similar spaces in their own communities. Look at this one." She handed Eastwood a letter from a woman in Chicago. "I never met May Thompson, but 20 years ago, one of her seedlings, that's what I call people she helped, became my mentor. He taught me that success isn't just about personal achievement, it's about creating opportunities for others. Today, I run a community center that operates on the same principles May used in her diner. When I heard about the garden, I finally understood that I'm part of something bigger, something that's been growing quietly for decades." The letter was accompanied by photographs of the Chicago Center and stories of lives changed there. It wasn't a copy of May's work. It was its own unique expression of the same principles. Dr. Wilson arrived for the morning meeting looking both exhausted and energized. "The medical program registration is overwhelming," he reported. "But here's what's fascinating. It's not just students applying for support. We're getting responses from healthcare professionals all over the country wanting to create similar programs in their communities. They're not asking for funding or direction. They want to connect, to share resources and ideas." Sarah Chen added her own update about the arts program. "Galleries and arts organizations are reaching out about collaboration. They're not just interested in our space, they want to understand May's approach to cultural community building. Some have already started implementing similar programs, creating spaces where art and community support intersect." The morning's developments forced a crucial discussion about the garden's future. The original plan had been to focus on Oakland, to perfect the model before considering expansion. But it was becoming clear that the garden was already growing, beyond their control, and maybe that was exactly what May had intended. Alma, who had been quietly observing while setting up the cafe space, finally spoke up. "You know what this reminds me of? May used to say that the diner was like a sourdough starter. You begin with something small, but if you tend it right, it can help create endless loaves of bread, each one different, but all carrying a piece of the original." The analogy sparked an important realization. They didn't need to control the garden's growth. They needed to nurture it, to provide the right conditions for it to spread naturally while maintaining its essential character. Carlos's team quickly adapted the digital platform to support this organic growth. Instead of a centralized system, they created a network model that would allow communities to create their own gardens while staying connected to the larger movement. Each local garden would be independent but linked, able to share resources and knowledge while maintaining its unique identity. As the day progressed, more challenges emerged. The media attention was intensifying, with major networks requesting interviews and demanding access to May's documents. Wealthy donors were calling, offering large sums to support expansion. Politicians were expressing interest in creating government programs based on the garden's model. The team gathered in the Victorian's newly restored conference room to address these challenges. The space, with its warm woodwork and large windows overlooking the gardens, seemed to inspire clear thinking. "We need to make a decision," Tommy said, summarizing the situation. "Do we try to control this growth, or do we embrace it?" Margaret, who had been reading more of her mother's papers, looked up. "Mom wrote about this possibility. Listen to this. The true test of the garden will come when it starts to grow beyond what any one person or group can control. That's when we'll see if the principles are strong enough to sustain themselves." Eastwood had been unusually quiet throughout the discussion. Finally, he spoke. "We're thinking about this the wrong way. We're still acting like we're in charge of something that was never ours to control. The garden isn't a program we're launching. It's a movement that's been growing for decades." May understood that. Maybe it's time we did too. This perspective led to a radical revision of their opening plans. Instead of a grand launch positioning the garden as a new initiative, they would frame it as a continuation and celebration of work that was already happening in communities everywhere. The team worked late into the night, revising everything from press releases to program structures. The changes weren't just cosmetic. They represented a fundamental shift in how they understood their role. The medical program was restructured to emphasize connection and support between existing healthcare initiatives rather than creating a new, centralized system. The arts program became a network of collaborative spaces rather than a single institutional program. The Business Development Center was reimagined as a hub for connecting and supporting community-based economic initiatives. As midnight approached, Margaret discovered one final note from her mother, tucked into the back of the safe. "To those who find themselves at the garden's crossroads. You're probably facing the moment I both hoped for and feared, the moment when the garden begins to grow beyond what any one person or group can direct. This is when you'll be tempted to impose control, to create systems and structures to manage its growth. Resist that temptation. The garden's strength isn't in its programs or buildings. It's in the connections it creates, the way it helps people. Recognize and build upon the network of support that already exists in every community. Its power isn't in what it provides, but in what it reveals, the capacity for kindness and growth that exists everywhere, waiting to be recognized and nurtured. Let it grow naturally. Trust the principles that have brought it this far. Remember that every community will express these ideas in its own unique way, and that's exactly as it should be. The garden isn't a franchise to be replicated. It's a reminder of what's possible when we help each other grow." The note confirmed their new direction. The next morning, 2 days before the official opening, they began implementing their revised approach. The media strategy shifted from promoting the garden as a new initiative to telling stories of community support and connection from around the country. The digital platform was opened up, allowing communities to create their own nodes and connections organically. The opening event was restructured as a celebration of community builders everywhere, with May's story serving as inspiration rather than centerpiece. As word of these changes spread, something remarkable happened. The pressure of media attention and institutional interest began to shift. Instead of focusing on the garden as a single project, reporters began exploring similar initiatives in their own communities, organizations that had been seeking to replicate. The garden started looking for ways to support and connect existing community efforts. The garden was becoming exactly what May had envisioned, not a program to be copied, but a catalyst for recognizing and strengthening the networks of support that already existed everywhere. The day before the opening, Eastwood stood in the Victorian's Tower Room, looking out over Oakland. The city was changing in subtle ways, not because of the garden itself, but because people were beginning to see their communities differently, recognizing the potential for growth and connection that had been there all along. Tommy joined him, carrying the latest update on opening preparations. "Everything's ready," he said, "but not in the way we originally planned." "That's exactly right," Eastwood replied. "We're not ready because we finished building something. We're ready because we finally understood what May knew all along, that the garden isn't something we build. It's something we help people discover in their own communities." As the sun set over Oakland, casting long shadows across the gardens, newly planted grounds, the team gathered for one final pre-opening meeting. The Victorian hummed with quiet energy, like a living thing preparing to fulfill its purpose. Tomorrow, they would open their doors not as creators of something new, but as caretakers of something that had been growing quietly for decades. The garden would begin its public life not with a declaration of achievement, but with an invitation to recognize and nurture the capacity for growth and connection that existed in every community. Mae Thompson's long-hidden vision was about to bloom, not as a single garden, but as 1,000 seeds taking root in communities everywhere. The morning of the garden's opening dawned with unexpected fog rolling in from the bay, shrouding the Victorian in a mystical haze. As the sun rose, it created a stunning effect. The restored, stained glass windows glowed like beacons through the mist, their colored light seeming to reach out into the community. Eastwood arrived before dawn, parking his car on the street rather than in the newly constructed lot. He wanted to walk through the neighborhood, to experience the garden's opening the way a community member would. The fog muffled his footsteps as he made his way along the path Mae had walked countless times between her diner and what would become the garden's home. He wasn't alone for long. Through the fog came others, Dr. Wilson and his medical students, Sarah Chen and her artists, Carlos and his tech team, all approaching quietly from different directions. They gathered in front of the Victorian, no one speaking, all understanding the weight of the moment. Margaret arrived last, carrying something, wrapped in an old dish towel from the diner. "Mom's guest book," she explained, unwrapping it carefully. She kept track of everyone who came through the diner, not just their names, but their dreams, their needs, their potential to help others. "I thought we should continue the tradition." The book's first entry, dated April 15, 1957, was written in Mae's flowing script. "Today we open our doors. May everyone who enters find what they need, and may they leave ready to help others do the same." As the fog began to lift, people started arriving, not in the rushed crowd they had expected, but in small groups and pairs, each with their own story of connection to Mae's network of kindness. They came not as spectators, but as participants, each understanding their role in the growing movement. The formal opening ceremony had been replaced with something more organic. Instead of speeches and ribbon cutting, people gathered in small circles throughout the building and grounds, sharing stories of community support and making connections for future collaboration. In the medical center, Dr. Wilson hosted a group of healthcare providers from across the country, each sharing their experiences of combining medical care with community building. The discussion wasn't about the garden's programs. It was about recognizing and strengthening the networks of care that already existed in their communities. The art spaces filled with a natural flow of creativity. Sarah Chen had arranged Not, a traditional exhibition but a series of interactive installations where artists and community members could contribute their own visions of growth and connection. The walls, initially sparse, began filling with a collective expression of community aspirations. In the technology hub, Carlos's team demonstrated the platform they'd developed, but the focus wasn't on the technology itself. Instead, they showed how digital tools could help people recognize and strengthen the existing networks of support in their own communities. The cafe space, under Alma's guidance, became exactly what Mae had created in her diner, a place where conversations flowed, naturally, where connections were made, where dreams were shared and supported. The coffee and food were secondary to the atmosphere of possibility she had cultivated. Throughout the morning, more people arrived, each finding their way to the spaces and conversations that called to them. The Victorian, with its restored grandeur, and modern adaptations seemed to embrace them all, its spaces perfectly suited for this organic gathering. The climactic moment came not with fanfare, but with a quiet revelation. As the morning sun finally broke through the fog, illuminating the Victorian in full glory, Margaret discovered something her mother had left in the guest book, a hidden pocket in the back cover containing one final letter. "To all who gather here today, you've discovered something I learned over many years of helping dreams grow, that the most powerful changes happen not through grand gestures or formal programs, but through the quiet recognition of our connection to each other. The garden isn't a place or a program. It's a reminder of what's possible when we help each other grow. Every community has its own garden of possibilities, waiting to be recognized and nurtured. What you're creating here today isn't new. It's a celebration and strengthening of what has always existed. The networks of support, the connections between dreams, the capacity for growth that lives in every community. Let this place be not a center that controls, but a heart that pumps life into the natural networks of kindness that surround us all. Let it remind us that every act of helping creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can see. The garden is now yours, all of yours. Help it grow, not by controlling its growth, but by nurturing the conditions that allow kindness and connection to flourish naturally. With eternal hope, May. As Margaret read the letter aloud to the gathered crowd, something shifted in the atmosphere. The opening of the garden was no longer about launching a new initiative. It was about recognizing and celebrating a truth May had understood all along, that communities grow best when people help each other naturally, without formal programs or institutional control. The day continued with an organic flow of connections and commitments. People left not with formal memberships or program registrations, but with renewed understanding of their role in their own community's growth. The garden had opened not as a finished institution, but as a living reminder of what was possible when people recognized their power to help each other grow. As evening approached, Eastwood found himself back in the entrance hall, watching as people continued to arrive and connect. The installation telling May's story had become interactive, with visitors adding their own tales of community support and connection. "We didn't launch something today," he said to Tommy and Margaret, who had joined him. "We recognized something. That was already there." "That's exactly what Mom wanted," Margaret replied, holding the guest book close. "The garden isn't a place. It's a revelation of what's possible in every community." As the sun set on the garden's first day, it stained. Glass windows once again glowed like beacons in the gathering dusk. But now they illuminated not just a beautiful building, but a profound truth about community and growth, that the most powerful changes come not from formal programs or institutions, but from people helping people, dreams connecting with dreams, hope growing naturally in the fertile soil of human kindness. 1 year after the garden's opening, Eastwood sat in what had once been May's Diner, now a small community cafe run by local students learning business skills. The building had been restored rather than replaced, maintaining its original character while serving its new purpose. He was reviewing a leather-bound journal, a collection of stories and outcomes from the garden's first year. The results weren't measured in traditional metrics of success. Instead, the journal documented connections made, dreams supported, and communities strengthened. Each entry told a story of organic growth and natural support, exactly as May had envisioned. Margaret joined him, sliding into the booth with 2 cups of coffee. "Mom's special blend," she said, nodding toward the cups. The students found her recipe in an old notebook and recreated it. The familiar aroma brought back memories of that first morning when he'd seen the photograph that started everything, or rather, helped him recognize what May had been building all along. "Have you seen today's updates?" Margaret asked, pulling out her tablet. The garden's digital platform had evolved into something unique. Not a social network exactly, but a living map of community connections and growth. The screen showed dozens of new gardens sprouting up across the country and beyond. Each was unique, adapted to its local community's needs and culture, but all shared the core principle May had established, helping people recognize and strengthen the networks of support that already existed in their communities. "Look at this." "One," Margaret said, pointing to a story from a small town in Minnesota. A local librarian, inspired by May's story, had transformed her library into a community hub where people could connect and support each other's dreams. She hadn't copied the garden's programs. She'd recognized and nurtured the potential for growth that already existed in her community. Tommy arrived with Dr. Wilson and Carlos, carrying a stack of papers that turned out to be the latest impact assessment. But unlike traditional nonprofit reports, this one told stories rather than statistics. The medical program has evolved exactly as your mother would have wanted, Dr. Wilson said, sitting down with them. Instead of creating a centralized system, we're helping communities recognize and strengthen their existing healthcare networks. The results are remarkable. Better access to care, stronger preventive programs, more young people entering healthcare, professions. Carlos added his perspective on the technology side. The platform's main function isn't to manage programs, it's to help people see the connections that already exist in their communities. We're just making visible what May understood intuitively. Sarah Chen joined them, fresh from installing a new community art project. The arts program has completely transformed from what we originally planned, she reported. Instead of creating a traditional gallery space, we're helping communities recognize and celebrate their own cultural resources. Every neighborhood has its artists, its storytellers, its creators. They just need space and support to flourish. As they shared updates and stories, Alma brought over a fresh pot of coffee and her own news about the cafe training program. We're not just teaching business skills, she explained. We're showing young people how to create spaces where community can grow, just like May did. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Diana Foster, the reporter whose article had helped spread May's story. She'd spent the past year documenting how the garden's influence had spread, not through formal expansion, but through natural growth and recognition. I've been thinking about how to describe what's really happened here, she said, joining their table. It's not about replication or scaling up. It's about awakening, helping people see the potential for growth and connection that already exists in their communities. Eastwood nodded, understanding. The garden hadn't created something new. It had helped people recognize and nurture what was already there. Every community had its own May Thompsons, its own networks of support, its own capacity for growth. The garden simply helped make these visible and provided tools to strengthen them. As the afternoon light filtered through the diner's windows, casting familiar patterns on the restored counter, Margaret shared one final discovery. In renovating the Victorian, they'd found a time capsule May had prepared just before her passing. Inside was a letter dated for opening 1 year after the garden's launch. To those who have helped the garden grow. If you're reading this, a year has passed since the garden began its public life. You've probably discovered by now that its true purpose isn't to create something new, but to help people recognize the capacity for growth and connection that exists in every community. Success isn't measured by how many programs you've launched or how many branches you've opened. It's measured by how many people have recognized their power to help others grow, how many communities have discovered their own gardens of possibility. The greatest achievement isn't in building something that people need. It's in helping people recognize what they already have and what they can build together. Keep nurturing these discoveries. Keep helping people see the connections that surround them. Keep believing in the power of small kindnesses to create lasting change. The garden isn't a place or a program. It's a reminder of what's possible when we help each other grow. With eternal gratitude, May. The letter confirmed what they'd learned over the past year. The garden's true success wasn't in its programs or facilities, but in how it had helped people recognize and strengthen the networks of support that existed in their own communities. As evening approached, they watched people coming into the diner, students meeting mentors, artists discussing projects, healthcare workers connecting with community members. The scene could have been from May's time, but it was happening now, part of the continuing growth she had nurtured for so long. Eastwood looked around the table at the team that had helped bring May's vision to life. "You know what I've realized," he said. We didn't build the garden. We just helped people see it. It was already there, growing in every community, waiting to be recognized and nurtured. Margaret smiled, touching the worn cover of her mother's guest book. That's exactly what Mom understood. The garden isn't something we created. It's something we helped people discover in themselves and their communities. As the sun set on, another day of quiet growth and natural connection, Mae Thompson's vision continued to flourish, not as a single garden, but as thousands of discoveries of the potential for growth and support that existed in every community. The garden had become exactly what she had hoped, not a monument to her work, but a living reminder of what's possible when people help each other grow. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.